everyone, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar. I'm sure many of you are acquainted with the huge variety of listings on Outschool that take what we might call traditional topics and approach them in new and interesting ways. So today I'm really glad to have this webinar with some teachers who do just that. We'll kick off with some introductions. My name is Julie and I'm Outschool's community manager. So you may have seen me in the teacher Facebook group or sending newsletters or surveys or other communication. And I'm joined by Merium, Tammy, and Savannah. So let's get some introductions from our teachers. And I'd love to start with Merium. Could you let everyone know who you are and what you teach on Outschool?
Hi, my name is Merium Khan, and I teach, for the most part, Shakespeare classes, Shakespeare, a little bit of other literature, as well as writing classes here in Outschool. Did you want more details about yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, we'll get into some of those details later, but now I'll pass it over to Tammy.
Hi, I am Tammy Wenhame. I teach Pokemon paragraphs and super Pokemon sentences mainly. I also teach sentence diagramming as well, but my main class is right now Pokemon paragraphs.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And Savannah?
Hi, I'm Savannah Strebeck. My main classes would be Disney villains and the sociological view of their histories, but I also teach criminology classes on Outschool.
Very cool. Thanks so much for sharing that. And now let's get into some of the meat of this topic. So I'd love to hear, in general, how do each of you think about taking a normal topic and turning it into something fun? So, you know, Merium, you have the Shakespeare classes that you make really accessible for kids of all ages. Could you explain a little bit about how you came to that idea and how you end up doing that?
Well, Shakespeare has been an interest of mine for many years. I was fortunate enough to have a teacher in middle school who really brought it to life for us. And I know it's very daunting subject to teach, and a lot of times poor teaching turns people off from Shakespeare for life. And so I really wanted to make it fun and enjoyable. And so I try to pick some classes that are focused on hot topics like insults, for example. Kids love Shakespearean insults. So using the insults, it's a great way to bring in discussions about the plays, the plots, the themes. And the other thing that I do is I make it multimedia. So I mix in, you know, art, as well as video recordings, you know, it's difficult in an online setting, but as much as possible, I just try to bring it to life.
Very cool, I really like that. And Tammy, with your Pokemon sentences and Pokemon paragraphs, I watched a couple of those recently, and you're so into the Pokemon, but how do you make sure that you can, like, how does that come together in a writing class?
The students themselves are incredibly passionate about Pokemon, and they come in with this attitude of joy over this concept of creating their own Pokemon. And it is just literally channeling that energy down an educational path. It is brainstorming with them as a group. It's pulling in ideas. It's taking those ideas as a group and then putting them into a way in which they write. So when they start verbalizing what they're doing, they say, put that on your paper, make it a complete sentence. And it's taking the passion that they already come with and showing them that they can learn with it. And most of them are highly receptive to that. They engage in it quickly.
Very cool, I love that. Thanks so much for sharing. And Savannah, what about you? How do you take, I know that sometimes you actually weave criminology in with Disney as well.
Definitely. So kids love Disney villains. Gaston is one of the most popular characters in Disney World. So kids automatically are drawn to the villains. They're interested in them. And so if you can take parts of their history and allow them to guide themselves through it, and you're kind of just asking questions and engaging what do they know already and pushing it further, they really start to understand sociology and criminology without having to go in and look at real life cases. They see somebody they love and they get to go through it with the same passion, similar to Tammy. The passion was already there, but now you're getting to guide yourself through it.
Great, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you suggest for other people who are teaching some more mainstream topics. Maybe you love science, maybe you love criminology, maybe you love writing or Shakespeare. How would you suggest people try to find a hook for kids in that way while still being authentic? And yeah, maybe let's go with you, Savannah.
I would definitely suggest just never turn off your ability to look for things. If you're in Walmart and you see kids snatching something off the shelves, look and see what that is. Don't stop looking. Every TV show, every commercial, that's an opportunity. Somebody is advertising something for you. They're literally have already done the research for you and know that this is what children enjoy. So take advantage of that and use it for your own abilities to reach children.
That's really smart. And I think coming from a criminologist, that's probably you're very attuned to watching what people do and kind of observing those behaviors. So that's very smart. Thanks for sharing. And Merium, I know that you have a different approach because you're not using this like media to draw kids in. You're using more of a different teaching technique or, maybe a subject matter that might be more popular with kids. Can you explain a little bit about maybe what inspired you to do that or how you came up with those ideas?
Well, for me, I guess the main thing that parents mention about my classes is really a function of how I approach it in the classroom, and that is just being really excited about it, being really passionate about it, and that's something that when the kids see that this is interesting, and also the other thing is I don't dumb things down. I actually, to prepare even my elementary school classes, I'm going through like hardcore Shakespeare literary criticism. And then I'm finding like these really neat things that they notice and pick up from his plays, and I'm presenting it to the kids. And, sometimes, and then the parents surprise me because, they'll tell me that they're surprised, actually. They'll say that, the kids get so into it and so excited about it with me that they say that they ask for Shakespeare for birthdays and Christmas. And so it just, I guess for me, it's about opening up this possibility that this is a fun subject. And hey, look at what it has to tell us. Look at what it has to offer us. And I don't know, like I just bring that excitement and they kind of tag along with me.
Nice. I love that. That's so cool. And yeah, I think it really helps when you're into the subject as well, that can really come through. So that's why, teaching what you're passionate about always makes for a good class. And Tammy, I'd love to hear from you on the subject, if you had advice for people who are trying to do this kind of thing, or if you had, a story about the inspiration that you wanted to share.
I'd kind of like to reiterate what Savannah said. My target market group is my 10-year-old son. The Pokemon paragraph was born out of trying to get him to write and to connect with him with something that he found interesting. And then looking at how could I apply a curriculum standard or a writing technique to Pokemon. And creating your own ultra rare Pokemon is a descriptive paragraph, which you write in upper elementary. Then we do something called Explode the Moment, which is writing with great detail about one little part. Well, when they're battling their Pokemons, these guys zoom in and they explode it. You would be amazed at a child who doesn't want to write, and you give them something they want to write about. They will put more words on a piece of paper than their parent has ever seen. And it is born out of exactly what Savannah said. Watch what's going on around you. Observe what they're watching, observe what they're talking about. And that is a great way to hook them in. If you can find a way to relate it to what they're doing at that moment in their life.
I have something to add to that, which is, and it's actually a piece of advice I read in a writing book, which is start by romancing the students. And that's really, I think what we're doing is hooking them in somehow. I mean, it can be through, something like the villains or the Pokemon, or just, I guess in my case, I'm not teaming it up with, although it has been suggested to me to do Star Wars Shakespeare, which, it's because there are some books out there called Shakespeare's Star Wars, but, so that's the thing, is like creating that hook and creating that, that spark in them, and then, they can run with it.
Definitely. Totally hear that. And I love this discussion that we have going about, how you take those topics and make them interesting and how passionate all of you are about it and how the kids get so excited. But in turn, I know that sometimes in class, some kids can get a little more rambunctious, or they might be like, oh, I just want to talk about Pokemon all day long. And maybe even just general, excitedness from kids that takes them a little bit off track from the class you had planned. So I'd love to hear from each of you, how you handle that kind of thing. How do you make sure that learning outcomes are being met, even when the subject can be really exciting and kids are really engaging in the other direction? So I'd love to hear, maybe let's start with Tammy this time.
For me, it is true. They come in highly animated about it. And I do tell them up from the front, we are going to share something. I often do pack reveals where I hold the Pokemon pack, I open it. I say, is that a good card or a bad card? To engage them and to bring them in, and kind of that's our opener. And I always tell them, if you brought something to share, that's great. We will do it at the end of class. And generally speaking, they will hold it off if that's the rule. If chat gets a little out of control, I'll say, let's get back on topic. But one technique I use is I actually check in individually with each of my writers. I will say to you, I'm putting you on mute. We're going to write for 5 minutes, and I'm going to check in with each of you. And all they see is the top of their heads. I'll be honest with you. They are writing. And I think they realize when I have the authority to say, this is what we're going to do. We love what we're writing about, and we're excited about what we're writing, but we're going to put it on paper. And then at the end, I say, let's share our bold beginnings. You're all going to want to take my class now. And they will share them with joy. And I'll have them read the whole paragraph when all I asked for was one sentence. But generally speaking, if I give them a rule, they'll follow it. Knock on wood, that stays that way.
Yeah, honestly, Tammy, when I was a kid, I would have loved to take your class, because my sister and I, we would just talk about Pokemon, and then we'd write about Pokemon, and then we have some other video games or shows. So yeah, I think that's really awesome, and great that you can, direct them to put that energy in the right place too. Savannah, what about you?
So definitely what Tammy's saying, go ahead and set some ground rules ahead of time, and that helps tremendously, because otherwise I feel like you kind of catch them off guard. You were talking about something fun, now they're talking about something fun, and suddenly you put the brakes on it. If you can, always try to just steer it back in my classes. So if you're really into Maleficent maybe, and you're knee deep in a conversation, maybe I'll catch one of your sentences and say, well, we were talking about this, but how does that relate to this? And so it turns them around, but it makes them know that what they're saying is genuinely important, and it's genuinely on topic, and it's not wrong to let your mind go, but let's use it constructively. So definitely ground rules and just steering it back.
Great. Yeah, that's really, I think that setting the expectations up front, and then also, being the teacher who is like, okay, now we're going to do this, that is very important in managing the classroom. And Merium, what about you? How do you make sure that you are keeping kids on track, even when I'm sure that you are also getting very excited about the topic sometimes?
Yeah, I guess the advantage I have is that it's an unfamiliar subject for most of them, Shakespeare. So, there's less of that tendency to go off the rails. Now, I do have, because I have some classes that are geared towards gifted students. And so you will have some students that tend to be very knowledgeable, or, I get a bunch of students who are twice exceptional. So they're gifted, but they might also have ADHD or something. And so, a lot of times the filter might not be there. They're really wanting to participate a lot more and taking time from other students. And so a lot of it is just, unique online classroom management. I mean, it's totally different than a live classroom, but just making sure that I know I use a lot of when I have a student who just knows, I know so-and-so knows the answer, but I want to see if anyone else knows, and some students that I've had in repeat classes, we have an agreement, hey, you know what we talked about, right? You're going to let everyone take a chance to speak, and, little things like that, just to keep it on track.
Great. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I think that that's a really great touch on, just being able to address different learners, because that's going to come up, whether you have a class on Pokemon and writing or Disney or Shakespeare or, anything else, I feel like that kind of stuff could happen in your classroom and you just need to know, how to handle it. So really great advice there, Merium. And I'd love to hear from you if we could all just think back to like an example in your class of how you've seen kids benefit or be more engaged from a class like yours. Try to think of something specific, and I would love for each of you to share. And if you're ready, maybe Merium again?
Well, let's see. So for the insults, one activity that I do at the end is, so they have an insult battle where they're taking the insults and they're using them against each other. And what I have them do after that is they write a farewell message. So I tell them, okay, imagine you're the teacher and you have to tell your students farewell, but in an insulting way using Shakespeare's insults. And then, so that's one thing that they really get a kick out of. And so I remember one time they really took it to the extreme and they were like, you heedless Joltheads, thou hast no more brain than earwax, you are the most useless group of students. I mean, just they really ran with it. And well, and then so what I started doing now is I started giving them the chance to go the other way and saying, well, if you're the students bidding farewell to me in a Shakespearean insulting context, how would you do it? So and that's a lot of fun, and it really gets them, feeling like, hey, Shakespeare is pretty cool.
I love that. That's such a funny way to wrap up class. You walk away, you're just like, wow, what did they call me? Very cool. And let's go over to Savannah next. Do you have an example of how kids have benefited from a class like yours?
Yeah, I actually had a mother write me. Her kid had completed the class probably a few months ago, and she was discussing that they kind of thought it was a fun class. It was just for enjoyment purposes more, but they started realizing that real life events were easier to explain to her. Like she started watching the news and using some of these skills where maybe they were talking about a criminal or an event or someone did something that was against the law. And they started asking questions about, well, what happened here? What caused this? And they started realizing that it was just so much easier to maybe talk about things that had been difficult or touchy subjects with their learner beforehand. And they were really going in deep to understand the things that were happening around them. And they discussed that that was nice at a young age to be able to sit down and have mature discussions about cause and effect with people. That was pretty cool.
That's really powerful. That's kind of amazing that you were able to experience that and be a part of that. Great. And Tammy, what about you? Do you have an example that you'd like to share?
Yeah, recently I had a learner who went through, Pokemon runs three weeks. And the first class, she did an amazing job, and she was orally telling me her story. And I get an email from her mother, and she sends me a picture of our graphic organizer, and there were 3 words on it. And she says, my learner struggles with writing. And I sat down and sent her a video, and I said, let's stay after class, and I'm going to scribe for your learner. And your learner's going to tell me her paragraph using our organizer from that day, but I'm going to type it so that this learner can see she has it in her and it's not stuck in her pencil, and to get it out. So I scribed for this young learner, and I stayed after class with her, and she wrote an amazing paragraph. And then in the 3rd class, she wrote her paragraph, held her organizer up, and it was filled in. And it was just teaching her that don't get it stuck in the pencil. It's okay. Sometimes you need a scribe or use Google Voice to write. And that was a big breakthrough for her. And she turned around and signed up for the class again. And that's a great compliment that she felt comfortable to go write again.
That's really amazing, Tammy. And that's just such a great example of going above and beyond as a teacher. So thank you for doing that. I'm sure you made a huge difference to her. And yeah, I think that all of these kids have, something really great to share. So it's wonderful if you can draw that out. Miriam, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, Savannah's comment reminded me of something. I think about all the fun and games with Shakespeare, but it's more serious one. So I have one session in my roundtable class, and what I've done is I kind of to catch 2 things at once. We're addressing long speeches and monologues, trying to be able to dissect them. We're doing character analysis, and we're also dealing with an important issue, which is that of anti-Semitism, because the character we're discussing is Shylock from The Merchant of Venice. And he's Jewish, and he has a very powerful speech about, you know, the prejudice he faces as a Jew. And I had a parent, and the kids really, you know, get into it, and, you know, it's a real learning experience for them. A lot of kids, I'm surprised they don't even know what the term anti-Semitism means, you know, before they start the class. And then a parent wrote to me after class saying that, thank you so much for discussing this, because honestly, I haven't been able to discuss this subject with my child without, you know, without crying. And so the fact that you were able to do it through the medium of Shakespeare, I'm really grateful. So I was really happy that, you know, that, and ultimately that's what literature is about. It's about reaching people. So that was really great.
Great. Wow, that's really amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Merium. And yeah, it's really, that is such a difficult thing for people to talk about. So I'm glad that you were able to find a way to approach it. And sometimes classes are a vessel for that. So thinking about everything that we just talked about, I was wondering if there's any other obstacles that come with teaching themes in this way, when you're addressing, you know, an interesting topic and marrying it with something more traditional, or if you're approaching a traditional topic in an unconventional way. So we talked a little bit about, you know, kids maybe getting off track. Is there anything else that you guys were thinking of in terms of obstacles there? And maybe we'll start with Tammy.
Yes, they'll call you out in a heartbeat if you don't know the names of 700 Pokemon. and I don't know the names of 700 Pokemon, and I don't know how to spell them all. But you just turn it around, because I think it was Savannah, or it might have been Merium, said there is one that's always an expert. And I kind of say, hey, so-and-so, can you help me here? What is the name that looks like a pineapple and is yellow? And you describe it, and they know it. That is a big obstacle, because as a teacher, you want to have credibility. You want to sound like an authority on the topic. And the writing aspect I have, the Pokemon aspect came with time, honestly. I learned that there's about 10 very popular Pokemon. So I did a lot of research. I got those 10 down. But now that I know that and see that, I also can bring it into our discussions. Because when I have one learner who is particularly knowledgeable, they are awesome to spark brainstorming. And they're problem solvers. I will have a learner say, what's that move when he jumps up and down and turns left and right? And the other learner will say, oh, it's smash 'em up, Pokemon, whatever. And they start to become a community. So it's turning around that obstacle to a learning opportunity, not just for me, but for everybody in the class at that moment. And they build off each other. And the brainstorming for the writing becomes more in depth. It becomes more thorough. They become more creative. So it's learning to turn that obstacle around into something you can use.
Great, great. Yeah, I was thinking that might be a challenge with people trying to call you out. You said Pokemon, or instead of Pokemon.
And
something like that.
It's not plural. There's no S on the end of it. It's just Pokemon.
So much you learn by doing this. Merium, what about you? Are there any other obstacles that come with the way that you approach your classes?
I mean, I can't think of any anything specific that comes to mind, you know, in terms of just the way I approach it, you know, any specific obstacles with that. Really just the typical obstacles that come with teaching this type of subject, you know, being able to meet the levels of all the different learners in the classroom. And, you know, because one thing that I do is I'm fairly flexible about ages in my class, because I have some background in gifted education, and I really encourage multi-age grouping and focus more on the level rather than the age label. So you know, being able to balance that, and so far so good. So far so good. It's worked out. And so that's one of the main challenges, is kind of keeping that balance of the material, so that I'm not just teaching to the lowest common denominator. Rather, what I'm doing is I'm lifting the level of the whole class up to a certain standard. And so that's one of the challenges, but so far it's been working pretty well.
Awesome. Well, that's really great and really great general teaching advice there. So thanks for sharing. And Savannah, what about you? Anything specific to your subject matter or in general that you want to share?
I would definitely say never stop researching for yourself on the subjects you teach, because there's always something coming out. Of course, with Tammy's, there's a new Pokemon game every 2 years, and they're coming out with a whole new set of Pokemon for her to look at. And it doesn't matter how old the subject is. With Merium, someone could come out with a brilliant paper on Shakespeare that she wants to incorporate. It could be some information that would be very nice. Disney comes out with new movies. Always be willing to go and look at this new information and never sit down and go, I know everything I need to know to teach this class, because there's always the opportunity to add a new slide, to add a new point, or to reach a kid that you weren't going to reach if you just had watched that Disney short before this movie. And so that's really important. Just never stop looking for yourself.
Great. I love that. And yeah, I think it's important for any subject, and whether it's, bringing two subjects together or just focusing on one, to just stay on top of it. And you're going to keep learning as well. So thanks for sharing that. So I think that we have a few questions that came in through the chat box. If anyone else has questions, I just wanted to make sure that you knew to either type in the chat box, or there's a Q&A function, so you can just hit that button and submit a question there. Before I start asking the questions, did any of the three of you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mary.
Okay. One thing I would suggest teachers do is just look for a niche, and just try and, find something that's just off the grid a little bit, and that helps to just get, or take something, even if it is a common subject, kind of like what Tammy's done is, writing paragraphs, but, bringing the Pokemon into it. So something that something that reflects your personality, something that just reflects your interest, that can, really distinguish the class.
That's great, Miriam. Thanks for sharing. And Tammy, what about you?
I was going to make an observation between Savannah and Miriam and our classes. They're very active. Miriam has a great activity to close at the end, and Savannah sounds like she engages her learners as well. And one thing I found that works really well for me is if I'm engaging them with something physical on their side of the computer, they're more apt to be engaged in my learning at that moment. It's not passive, it's active learning. And I found with Pokemon, it's a fun topic, absolutely. But there's a lot of learning going on. And it is by doing active things together. And they're writing, they're talking, they're making notes, they're doodling, they're drawing their Pokemon. And that active part of the learning is retained. There's retention going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that having, activities in class, or, having learners interact with each other, all these kinds of things will help to just solidify the knowledge in their mind. So, and especially, like you said, Tammy, getting something physical in their own space to, writing on a paper or something like that is a really great thing that sometimes you don't think about when you're doing an online class. So thanks so much for sharing. Anything else before I jump into the questions?
I would definitely say, when you start brainstorming ideas, don't limit yourself so much and think, well, that was stupid, I'm not going to do that. Because sometimes when you're brainstorming, you're like, well, these two things could go together. And then you start doubting yourself as an adult because you're like, but you have to remember that these are to appeal to young learners, or whichever age range you're in. So just because something seems silly to you, if it meshes well, if it works and you can do it, try it. The worst that can happen is you devote some time, but you're building your skills while you're building these classes. So even if the class fails, you still have that experience of building it, and you can modify it and change and move forward from there. But never closet yourself into, I can't do it because that sounds silly.
Yeah, and I would add to that, to have a document like you keep on your computer, Google Docs or something. Just every time you come up with a weird idea, just throw it in there. I have all kinds of weird ideas sitting in there. Hopefully I want to come out with soon. I think I've got like Shakespeare Fight Club and, things like that. I'm trying to come up, and some ideas will flop. I mean, I have a couple of classes that just don't do well for whatever reason. Friends, Romans, Countrymen, about Mark Antony's famous speech. I'm thinking of turning that to a different class, how to be a politician according to Shakespeare. Maybe that'll be more appealing, but just kind of keep that list going, just dump all your ideas in there, and it'll come in handy one day.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you all for sharing all of that. And I think the questions, I was just skimming through, some of them might be more like general advice, and some might be more specific to the unique topics that you're teaching. So let's kick off with one of these first ones, which is, what times of day are you all offering classes? And I'll probably preface this one by saying, everyone's schedule depends on what else you have to do during the day. So I would just love to hear from you, like what factors into your own scheduling and why you decide to choose the times that you choose. Let's kick off with Savannah.
So first thing, I definitely look at age range. If you're teaching like 3 to 4, you can do early morning or when public school might be in class because they're not of age to go to school. That's not interfering. Weekend classes are always nice just because learners are generally home, whether they're homeschooled or public schooled. But definitely look at your ages. Don't schedule a really, really late class if you're expecting children in America to take it and they're 3 years old. They're probably not going to take a class at 9 p.m. at night. So definitely take into consideration, if I had a child, would they probably be available for the computer at this time, and just span from there.
Great. I think that's really solid advice. What about you, Merium?
My strategy so far has just been to throw up a range of different times that I'm free at and see which ones stick. I found that midday Eastern Standard Time tends to be a pretty popular time. I've tried to get build up an Australian base by doing like 7-8 p.m. Eastern Time, and it would be the morning in Australia, but I occasionally get small batches of students from there, but it's typically I don't get enough on a regular basis. So I don't really have a specific strategy, just kind of see where my schedule has openings and stick those classes in there, especially because I do mostly one-time classes. I think there was a question about that too, and that's what I found to be the easiest and the one that parents usually go for me at least.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that. And what about you, Tammy?
I schedule Pokemon paragraphs twice a month at 6 p.m. I get a lot of learners outside of the United States. It's a very popular topic overseas as it is here. And then 2 other times during the month, I try to hit, like Merium said, the mid-afternoon, noon to 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I start my monthly schedule by blocking out that course because it's a 3-week course. That's my longest course. The rest of my classes are actually one times like Merium, and I just throw them in there wherever I can. And noon, 1 o'clock is Eastern Standard Time is an incredibly popular time for me. There's no rhyme or reason. It really fits around my life schedule. I homeschool my children in the morning. I'm a swim mom at night, so I have like a 3-hour window, and I just put them in there.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, guys. I think that, scheduling advice it's a very popular question, but like you all said, sometimes it is just a matter of your own schedule, and like Merium said, finding out what sticks. I think that there's Whittier in the Facebook group will often say it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. You just see,
I was trying to remember who said that.
I love that. So Erin was asking about your educational background for teaching the subject matter and how you describe yourself on the Why Me section on your class listing page. So Merium, would you like to share how you end up describing yourself there?
Sure. Well, I started teaching before the Why Me section came around, so honestly, I haven't updated all my classes there. What I do, what I have added to my listings, which is kind of a Why Me, but I could move it to that section, is I'll take some of my best comments from the reviews and put them at the end, because that way parents are not trying to wade through all these reviews and I'll pick some really like great comments. But as far as my educational background, for me, I'm a strong believer in autonomous learning and the power of being self-taught for many things. And, the interest and the depth someone can go in something if they have a degree versus they don't have a degree in that subject. You know, a lot of times a degree might not necessarily be relevant in that field. So for me, my interest in Shakespeare, I mean, aside from one class in college, a lot of it has been self-taught, a lot of reading. And so I don't get into, for me in my educational background, I stress more my teaching experience, which has been since I went to school at a pretty young age. I mean, I had a head start in getting experience, and so I've been teaching for many years. So for me, that's my main thing that I focus on in that section, my profile section, is my experience with teaching, and just the fact that I've been teaching in different settings over those years.
Great, great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And what about you, Tammy?
I have a background in packaging design, and I spent the last 15 years living out of the country, where I homeschooled my children bilingually and ran small group learning opportunities there. And when I came back to the States last year, I decided that I would seek my alternative teaching license. So I'm currently studying for that exam, which is next month. And that doesn't change my Outschool. I'm super happy to be here and plan to stick here for a while. But honestly, homeschooling my own children, teaching them in a bilingual manner, and just having a passion for what I like to do. And I don't even fill out the why me. Maybe I should. I haven't. I just feel like it's been organic, to be honest with you. I feel like I've offered a quality educational experience, and the parents have responded to that. And maybe it was luck, but I'm very pleased with how it's happened.
That's awesome. That's great, and good luck with your the rest of your schooling. And Savannah, what about you? How do you try to describe yourself in the Why Me section?
I'm kind of with Merium there. A lot of my classes came like right before the cusp of Why Me, so I haven't went back to fill in a lot of them. Just basically put what you would want to hear. If you looked at yourself, what would you want to hear from yourself to sell yourself? Because you are selling yourself as an experience. And just like Merium said, that doesn't necessarily mean your educational background. It could be your passion. It could be your experience. Or as Tammy was saying, she has her children. She's taught them bilingual. These are important things. So take what you have of yourself and put it out there for them to see, because there is no invaluable experience. So just put value on yourself and put that out there, and people will see it.
Great. I think that's really solid advice. And I'm not going to lecture you all to fill out your why me's, but I'll just say I'm a little disappointed. Just kidding. I think it can be a great place to describe yourself, but I think, like a lot of you said, if you put up your classes before that was available, then it might be a little bit tricky to go back and fill it out. I think Laura on our team has the same problem with her classes. I've outed her now, but she knows. Great, great. Well, thanks so much for sharing all of that. And let's see, we had another question about, Merium, I think you touched on this already, about the one-time classes versus multi-week classes and trying to decide, if you should break your class up. So I'd love to hear from all of you. How did you decide to do a one-time class versus a recurring class? Is there an advantage to one or the other? I would just love to hear your perspective on that. So let's start with Tammy.
I have two 3-week classes. One I just listed this week in Pokemon Paragraphs. I look at my one-time classes as sort of a funnel. It is a low investment from the parent. They get to see my teaching style. They get to see how their children interact with me. They get to see my enthusiasm, my energy, and if it fits with their learning style or not. And then I always follow up every class with an email to the parent. I tell them how their learner did. I explain if there could be improvement here or not improvement there. And then I recommend a class. So if they've taken super Pokemon sentences, the natural steps into Pokemon Paragraphs. And I use that as a funneling to the longer classes. And I honestly like the one-time classes. I equate it to a lottery. I scratch it off. I don't know what kids I'm going to get, but it's so much fun because I'm meeting new kids every day. And I personally really enjoy that. Some teachers might not, but I like that enthusiasm. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me happy. It keeps me excited with what I'm doing here at Outschool.
Great, great. I love that lottery analogy. That's so funny. What about you, Merium? How do you decide, what format or length of classes you'll have?
Yeah, I've found that the one-time classes tend to be more popular. I have a 5-week Shakespeare class that doesn't get as many enrollments as I would like, and so I wonder if it's just even though the one-time. What I find is that because I have several one-time classes, parents will come back over and over for like a different one-time class,
Mm-hmm.
right? Rather than commit to a 5-week class. So I think part of it could be scheduling, and part of it could be cost. And the new option with the ongoing class, I think, has been great because I've found that, and that's not Shakespeare, that is another kind of unique thing I do, which is called imitation writing. Um, and so that one filled up pretty quickly. And I think that because it's like a low investment type thing, you just pay for one class, but then they're hooked in by then. And also, again, my other classes serve as kind of a funnel for that as well. I have another imitation class that's 2 sessions, and virtually everyone in the recurring class is from that, that 2-session class. So yeah, I mean, for the 1-session classes for me have been, and I think I would have a question, as far as for you, Julie, is demographics of Outschool, in terms of the enrollments. Do you have the majority of parents? Do they prefer, when you look at Outschool as a whole, do they prefer shorter classes versus longer, several session classes?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Miriam, and I would have to look back at our data to give you a more solid answer. But I will say that one thing I've heard from, teachers like you and also Tammy, and I think Savannah, you have some one-time classes as well. We also had a webinar with Ben Corey, and he does a lot of one-time classes or shorter 4-week classes. There's kind of this resounding advice for new teachers, especially, to have some one-time classes. And I think that it helps a lot for existing teachers as well, if you can figure out a way to funnel them through, like Tammy said, start with the one time, usually about 1 hour for the older students, maybe 35 to 45 minutes for younger students. And that can be a good lead. It can also just help you in general build credibility. I would also say that it really depends on the other topics that you have available as well. And that can be the harder part to nail down, so you have this one-time class that they really enjoy, but how do you funnel them into that longer class and get a more committed student? That can be a little bit of an unknown area, and it can be a lot of trial and error, like you said, Miriam, and I think you're probably going through that right now. As far as what is more popular, there are definitely tons of one-time classes on Outschool that take place because, again, it's new, it's less commitment, it's less trouble scheduling. But especially around those times of the school year, like the start of the fall or spring semester, those longer classes can become more popular. And they do tend to, we had some 6-week classes starting in April, and I was like, what, you really want to commit to that in April through the rest of your summer? But, it happens for people sometimes. But yeah, I can dig into some more specific stuff and see if I might be able to share that in a future newsletter sometime. So thanks for bringing that up. And what about you, Savannah? How do you, did I ask you yet?
I'm kind of the odd one out. My most popular class is actually 6 weeks long, which would be the Disney villains. I do have one that spans 10 weeks, actually. It's a book club for very young children doing golden books. So it's very strange. Mostly when you start thinking of a topic, I just write down all the stuff I want to cover and say, can I sit down at one time and digest all of this information? And if you can't, you're going to need to make it multi-week because it's not enjoyable to shove everything down your throat at one time if it's just too much to do. So just kind of look at your information you want to pass and then decide 1 week or multi-week. And one thing that I'd started doing is I do offer Disney villains as a 6-week. We do 6 different villains. But I offered the one time as well. So you can choose to do one villain if maybe that's all you really wanted, or you can do the 6-week. And I started offering longer classes at a discount, kind of like the Costco way of doing it. So it's $10 to do one villain, but it's $48 to do 6 villains. So you're saving $12 if you were going to take them all at once. And I think that kind of persuasion, when people look at money that way and say, well, if I was going to do it anyway, why not take the $12 savings? Kind of consider doing that with your classes, and it's been beneficial for me. in the long run.
Great. That's a really practical way of approaching it. So thanks for sharing your process there. And I think someone in the chat, they actually didn't ask a question, but they were expressing, struggling with some kids who might be a little more chatty, and trying to ask them nicely to let another person finish, or calling on other students. So I was wondering if we could kind of revisit that conversation. And I'd love to ask, are there any specific techniques that you all use to help manage the classroom, but still promote interaction and engagement? Let's maybe start with Merium.
Yeah, so the one thing I mentioned earlier that I do is if there's one student who's just consistently raising their hand, I'll say, I know you know the answer, but let's see if anyone else knows. Sometimes I'll just call on students who didn't have their hand up, and sometimes they'll say, but I wasn't raising my hand. I say, I know, I just want to know what you think, and the other thing is, is just trying to, because especially with my one-time classes, I really have a very set schedule. I mean, it's a 70-minute class and it covers a lot of ground. And so we really don't have time for someone to, speak too much. So I really try to just tactfully, midway say, that's really interesting. So let's move on to this, because I want to make sure we get time to do this part, which is really interesting. Just little things like that to kind of redirect them gently, and just make it clear that, yeah, I'm looking for anyone else who'd like to answer. And then sometimes if it's a small class and no one else wants to answer, then, you do get those students who help to kind of pick up the slack of those other ones.
Definitely. Yeah, I really like that you have those kind of little phrases that you can say, like, we have something else interesting coming up, and you can guide them along that way. I really love that. What about you, Tammy? What are some things that you do to control that?
Very similar to what Merium does. If I have a student who is particularly excited about Pokemon, I will say, thank you for the fact. Please put that on your graphic organizer, and let's move on to this now. And if I have a quiet learner and a particular one that spoke a lot, I'll say, just like Merium, let's see what so-and-so has to say. I know you know the answer to that. And if nobody answers, I will literally say back to that learner, okay, you can tell me now. Because sometimes I have classes, honestly, that one is very talkative and the rest are just writing. So it depends on the class, but very similar to what Merium does.
Great, great. And what about you, Savannah?
Sometimes you have multiple learners that are trying to talk all at once as well. And I find giving them an order kind of helps. So if 9 people are talking, or 2 children are talking over each other, you go, okay, Tammy, you speak, and then we'll get to Merium. And that way Merium would know we're coming to her. Hold your thought. It's important, but don't talk over Tammy at this moment because we're letting her go. So it kind of acknowledges that everybody's trying to speak and gives them an idea of when they're going to, so that they don't blurt out over each other and everything gets mixed up. And then that's just a waste of time because we didn't understand anything anyone said. So giving them an order.
Yeah, it can almost be harder to hear 4 people talking at once on Zoom than it can be in person. So yeah, giving that order is super important. And that's why I've been calling all of you out like this as well. Just go around. But you're all well behaved, so that's good. And I think that this is maybe slightly related to helping to manage the class, but someone was asking about the suggested number of learners. So what do you all set your class sizes at, and does it change for different classes? Let's go with Tammy first.
I set Pokemon paragraphs to 6. I have ran it with 8, and I had a headache by the end of it because I have to keep swooping that little screen to see all their faces. So I set it at 6, and that's the number I can manage. And any more than that, the learner doesn't reap the benefits of the class. So it's important that it's controllable. It's important that I like to give each learner a chance to read what they've written. I like to check in with them. And if I have more than that, I don't feel that they're getting the best of me. So 6 is my max.
Great. Makes sense. What about for you, Merium?
For my classes, I set the maximum pretty high. like, well, I set it to 12, and sometimes I'll increase it if the number is getting up there. Mainly because, you know, I'm not doing something intense like requires one-on-one attention like writing. And I actually do have a writing class. Actually, that reminds me, I do have a writing class, the imitation writing, which is I think I had 11 last time. But what I've found is, for me, I find I tend to get a better vibe in the class when there's more learners, because it's just a lot more excitement, and because I'm gearing towards older ones in my writing. So I'm not like with really little kids. So they're old enough to kind of they're old enough that they usually tend to be more quiet than more talkative, you know. So that's the reason I put the number up. And then for the Shakespeare classes, I find that you know, a lot of kids just like to be quiet and listen. And so when I have a larger number, it creates a more vibrant atmosphere, because you're just statistically speaking more likely to have at least a few people who are going to be more chatty. So yeah, but it really just depends also on enrollment numbers, because when you're throwing out a lot of one-time classes, you know, you're going to have some that one might have 10. Usually, you know, it's going to be, I don't know, 8 and under. So yeah, it just depends on that too.
Yeah, great point, and a lot of great things to consider there, especially with age, because I do sort of see myself that the teenagers tend to be a little quieter. So then having a few more of them will help to either draw some out or at least just fill the empty space. That way you're not just asking your questions to no one. What about you, Savannah? What do you do for your class sizes?
So 10 is kind of a happy medium with most of my classes in the kid range, but definitely with younger kids, I feel like if you get a lot of them together, they're easy to get off topic, because one has a dog and the other has a bird, and next thing we're talking about Superman. So it gets harder to control the 3 to 5 year olds. And so, but with 18-year-olds, you could probably have 20, 30 of them in a room and hear from 2. So, and I definitely feel like that's important to take age. And then, as Tammy was saying, what are you doing in the class? If you're having to talk to each one-on-one, well, you say you devote 2 minutes to each one. Well, you run out of time really fast, and that kid technically got 2 minutes of class time with you, because what you're talking about over there doesn't really concern them. So that's definitely, if it's one-on-one, I would say keep it lower. If it's higher and you're lecturing, like Merium was talking about more, it helps to have more kids, because someone will talk to you back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, again, like a lot of great things to consider there, the type of class that you have, the type of interactions that you're expecting to have, definitely can be a little bit of a trial and error process like Tammy may have experienced, but I think that very important to think about as well. And then there was another individual asking, how do you include special needs learners in online classes? I'm not exactly sure how you all might want to answer this. Maybe it's how you've included people who have special needs who have entered your classes, or how you've made yourself more appealing and open as a teacher, but would love to hear from you a little bit about that as well. Maybe let's start with Savannah. Have you done anything like that?
I have. My classes get a good amount of kids with ADHD, autism, because they're already drawn to Disney. A lot of kids like it. It doesn't matter anything, the spectrum. And so the parents will a lot of times message me and say, hey, this is my daughter. She may not answer. And take what the parents say into consideration and take it as the gospel, and don't try to push it further than the parent wants. So if she says the kid's not going to talk, don't badger the kid until they cry and talk to you. Just, their parents know them. And it's a beautiful moment if there's a kid that you didn't expect to say anything and suddenly they're talking about something. And that's a glorious, beautiful breakthrough. But don't expect a miracle every time for a kid to just break out of their shell. Do everything you can to make them comfortable, because comfort engages learning. If they're uncomfortable, they're not going to retain anything you're saying anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, yeah, it's very important to just like take what the parent says seriously and don't push too much. And Miriam, what about you? I know you had mentioned earlier, but how do you make sure that you're inclusive of special needs learners and also open yourself up to that?
Well, I make sure to put a special needs statement on each of my listings saying that if you have a child with special needs, I would love to be able to help you. Just let me know. In advance what I can do. So a lot of times parents will message me and say, you know, my child has autism or dysgraphia, ADHD. So for dysgraphia, for the writing classes, I stress that kind of like what Tammy was saying, writing is about what's coming from your head. It's not about, you know, what your hand can do. It's about what your brain can think of. So I tell them about scribing, dictation software, typing, and I stress that. Autism, I love just the fact that I've been able to teach online and have so many different learners, because I feel like those learners really bring something unique to the classroom, like the neurodiversity aspect, you know, just the way those students, especially with literature, you know, because you're thinking about all these different issues, and the way that they think of things differently is just, I think it brings a great addition to the classroom. You just have to be patient as a teacher and recognize sometimes, you know, even if the parent might not mention it, sometimes recognize signs of, you know, a child who's being overly literal. They're not trying to get on your nerves or being rude, or like with me for literature, they might ask a question and it sounds it sounds sexist or racist, but they're just being very literal. You know, they're being very literal, and that's how they think. And so being able to respond in a way that's empathetic and understanding, and just managing any behavioral things with grace and understanding along the way.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that, you know, empathy is really at the heart of that. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. And what about you, Tammy?
Just this week, Monday, I had a student who's had a traumatic brain injury, and today I had one who has Tourette's. And when the parent tells you this, you just adjust how you teach to them. And it's very similar to what Miriam said. It is seeing where they're at that moment, change in your voice. I tend to get very excited. It's taking that tone down. Some react well to that. Some don't react well to that. And one of the reasons I keep my classes at 6 is I'm constantly scanning the eye contact of my learners to see how they're reacting, to me, to see if they're reacting to the work, to see if they're connected. And I will actually, maybe I might even chat, or if I have a verbal call on with a student, I'll say, Johnny, are you doing okay? Give me a thumbs up. I do a lot of nonverbal signals. That's comfortable for a lot of my learners. I say, give me a thumbs up if you're here. Give me your thumbs up if you're there. Give me a thumbs down if it's not going okay. A lot of students who have autism, they might not want to present at that moment. I'm fine with that. I say it's voluntary. And there are no mistakes in my classes. They're learning opportunities. And I stress that through the beginning. Don't be embarrassed. We're all here to have fun. We're all here to learn.
I would add to that, because I see this a lot, this question come up a lot from other teachers about interaction in the class. And I think it's important that teachers understand that because of the nature of the medium, because you're getting a lot of homeschoolers, people with alternative learning, you're going to have a higher than average population of special needs learners. And so you have to understand that when a student is shutting off their camera randomly in class, it could be because they have anxiety. It could be because they're having like sensory issues, and they're, you know, doing some self-soothing things, and they're embarrassed, you know, on the screen, having other kids see them, or whatever it might be. And so to work with that, and also to just be in tune with their the way they're responding, you know, because sometimes kids, for example, who are on the spectrum, and they get a little bit overwhelmed, overstimulated, and they start to withdraw. You, like Savannah said, you don't want to keep tugging them. You need to give them that space and not insist that they keep talking or they turn on their camera or what have you.
Yeah, that is really, really great advice. And I'm glad that you all have such a wonderful, you know, open, empathetic, understanding approach to this kind of thing, because I think that really helps the learners a lot. So thank you so much for sharing that and just for doing that. So we're at time now, we're actually a couple minutes over. I know we had a few more questions, but I think we'll wrap things up for now. Did any of you have some closing thoughts you want to share?
I have one thing to say, and I had talked with Laura about it previously. When I joined Outschool, I didn't know what to teach, and the advice to me was teach what you're passionate about. And I'm passionate about writing, and I'm passionate about the age group I teach. And when you're passionate about it, it comes across in your class. It comes across organically in your reviews. You're not asking, how did this go? You had fun. You had a good experience, and it will transfer over to your learners. So teach what you're passionate about.
I love that. I love that. What about you, Savannah? Any closing thoughts?
I would definitely say don't ever be discouraged. Outschool is amazing, and it's an amazing platform to reach so many people. You know, Merium was touching on that this is for children who are at home, so it gives advantages to children who might be disadvantaged in a public setting, a public school setting. And so just explore yourself, explore your classes, and be willing to reach out to anybody and never feel overwhelmed, because you are important and you're playing an important role to these kids.
Thank you so much, Savannah. And what about you, Miriam? Any closing thoughts?
One thing I tell my students all the time is I'm not the only teacher in this classroom. I tell them, you guys are my teachers. And, you know, I think that's a great philosophy to have as a teacher, is to really, when your students are sharing something with you, their thoughts about the subject or an answer to a question, is to accept it with an open mind. And honestly, some of the things, the observations my students have mentioned, I'll turn around and tell them, like, have you read any literary criticism? Because that is straight out of a textbook or like a high-level commentary on Shakespeare. Like, where did you even get this from? And it's just from them. And so, and I've sometimes even included their thoughts in my own class later on. So I'd say just be open to learning from your students too.
That's really awesome. And you three are so amazing. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you for sharing your experience. I know we talked, you know, not just about unique class topics, but about a whole other range of subjects. And it was awesome to hear all of your thoughts and your experiences. So just huge thank you for coming on and sharing with us today. And thank you everyone who tuned in. I'll post this as a recording to YouTube later today. Thanks again, and we'll sign off for now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.